Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Tonight, 20th of August 2012, it gives me a great deal of pleasure to introduce Commodore Bob Trotter, OAM. And I can't ever remember all the other things that follow Bob's title. I know he was Naval Officer in charge of HMAS Sydney. He's look, a list of things that Bob has done. There's just too many to mention for me. But we owe Bob a bit of gratitude, in fact, because about 10 or 12 years ago, he invited us, a few of us, down to go over the HMAS Stirling Naval Base. Bob was keen to show us the base. He's a submariner, and of course the submarines are an important part of that base. But on the way down, he said, "Oh, look, we'll just take a bit of time out," because he said, "I've been involved in a naval memorial park on the foreshore at Rockingham." I don't know whether any of you folk have been down there, but it's a wonderful park. Anyway, we went through the park, and all the time I'm thinking, we could do something like this with the Maylands Aerodrome. So I came back, and of course I only had to mention it to Frank Greenslade once, and he said, "Oh, sounds terrific. When can we go down and have a look?" So I think it was the day after, or a week after our next meeting, quite a number of us went down and had a picnic there, Bob, and of course our park has taken a long time to get up and running, but it's almost reached the point of fruition. They've got the plaques all made. They're just now going to do the groundwork, and so we'll have probably not quite as grand as your park, but we'll have a beautiful park to commemorate the history of the Maylands Aerodrome. Thanks, Bob, for introducing Pam and I to your park, because that's where we got the idea that it would be good for our local aerodrome. So, ladies and gentlemen, without any further ado, I'd like Bob to begin his presentation. Thanks very much, Bob.
Thanks, Greg. If I knew I was going to create so much work, I wouldn't have taken you down there. But anyway, look, it is a great pleasure to be here tonight. I tend to move around a bit, so if I get in the way, just say, "Get out of the way." Anyone that I walk in front of. But I think, if you have a look at that, I'm not going to start to tell you the story about HMAS Sydney. That'll come out as we go through the presentation. But I always start with this one, because it just really describes the scale of the loss that happened in that battle. All 645 young men lost their lives, included 6 Air Force guys and 4 civilians. In those days, the canteen managers were civilians. In this case, 2 of them were Maltese Australians. It seemed to me that at that era, a lot of the canteen type operations run across all of the British-based services had a majority of Maltese in them. I think it was something to do with the fact that they'd been made promises by the British government over many, many years about the sacrifices that they had made, being a base for centuries for whatever expeditionary natives the Brits had at the time, and it was usually the Maltese that paid the penalty. But anyway, that's not why we're here tonight. History was made on the 16th of March 2008, when for the first time in some 66 years the wreck of Sydney, or Sydney, was sighted by human eyes. Sorry, where Sydney was found. It was a few weeks later before she was actually sighted. The history was made when the wreck was found. And then just a few weeks later, after having identified the wreck by sonar only, the search vessel had been in, changed its equipment and gone out to have a look for the first ever vision. So let's just have a quick look at that. Here we are, it's the 3rd of April 2008. It's at the sonar position, or the GPS position of Sydney. Calm seas, and the remotely operated vehicle is slowly descending to a depth of 2,450 metres, which is the depth at which the wreck lies. And of course the atmosphere in the search vessel's survey room was electric. Many of the people in there had been working on the search for Sydney for half of their lives. I was a relative newcomer, but some of them had spent decades waiting for this moment. Just a bright blue light of the remotely operated vehicle, the occasional fish, and then a shadow. So I won't tell you too much about these at the moment. That's one of the forward turrets with the hole right between the barrels, correct here. Blew the roof off. Again, just to describe the scale of that, in an action state there was 22 men in that turret.
Loud.
A bit loud.
That's good. Thank you.
I'm used to audiences that are a lot older.
Thank you.
No, it's you that we can't do that.
Platform that the big gun direction system sat on. Again, the hole straight through it. That's the gun director itself. It's a ridge roof lying against it. And the bow, which separated from the ship, was about 800 metres away, and it's lying upside down. With this and all of the stills that you'll see later, it's very cold here, no oxygen. And so essentially what you're seeing, apart from a bit of growth, is the condition of the ship as it left the surface some 66 years earlier. So Sydney had been off to war. 1940, she was the glamour ship, if you want to call it that, of the cruiser fleet within the Mediterranean, working for the Royal Navy. Sydney took part in a number of actions. The bombardment of Bardia, Libya of course has been in the news very recently. Essentially there's always something going on there, but that was in 1940. The bombardment of Bardia. Also the containment of the Italian fleet in the Battle of Calabria, which basically saw almost the end of any Italian naval action within the majority of the Mediterranean. They seldom came further out of their ports than about here. And then later on, which was the not quite the final, but it really underlined that Battle of Calabria, was the Battle of Cape Sparta, when Sydney, almost on her own, sank the Italian cruiser Bartolomeo Cannelloni and severely damaged another. Battle of Cape Sparta off Crete, the sinking of the Italian cruiser. That's men there, waiting to be picked up. Then at the end of 1940, she was in Alexandria. As often, she would return to Alexandria, but this was time for rest and repair, and then back to Sydney.
Sydney come home, back to the city whose name it has so proudly carried through a year of adventure.
So 10th of February 1941.
So rich in achievement. Never has the pride of an act ridden higher, as Australia hailed the battle-scarred cruiser, quietly glide to her mooring. Then up emotion of wives, and mothers and relatives on the dock, lurked in a storm of bottom that at times died on hysteria. And why not? Women who wait for 12 long months, months filled with longing, with anxiety, with loving pride, and now at last their ship's coming. Their ship. Governor General Lord Gary takes aboard the message of welcome from every man, woman, and child in the Commonwealth. Well done, Sydney. Minister for the Navy, WMU, Australia's great little veteran, salutes the ship. He takes a bow from an expert.
I ask you to regard the gift as part of the sentiments of gratitude and admiration which dwell in the heart not only of every citizen of Sydney, but of every true Australian, every Britisher today. We are indeed proud.
Down to the arms of loved ones they go. Babies proudly shown that their dads have never seen. In the midst of the heroics of war, let us not the women who wait. The Navy's on parade, and a proud sight they make. 200,000 Sydney citizens line the streets, thunderously welcome the men of the cruiser, as 400 of the ship's complement march through the city. Never in its history has the Navy been outnumbered like this, 500 to 1. 500 to cheer each officer, each lady, each boy of this gallant ship's company, who have dared so much, achieved so much, added so much to the glory of their... At the town hall, Captain Collins is received by the Lord Mayor, who attended the ship's company a civic reception. Bravo, Sydney! The crowd roared its delight. And all Australia echoes that sentiment in tribute to a splendid ship, a grand crew, and a gallant captain. Here he is.
We're at the hell of our time. With a bit ready to speak. Ship's company. Well, beyond praise, I cannot speak too highly of the way both the youngsters and the more state ratings perform their duties, particularly when there was a chance of an encounter with the enemy. They were all in, of course, particularly at Chip. I thank the citizens of Sydney for their welcome. I know the ship's company are all looking forward to many happy reunions.
Of course, just 9 months later, it was all different. So, late in 1941, in the middle of about the third week of November, Sydney's operating off WA. She had escorted a troop ship, the Zealandia, from Fremantle up to Singapore, where she handed the ship over to some Royal Naval escorts. In fact, Sydney sailed from Fremantle on what was then Armistice Day in 1941, 11th of November. 20th of November she was overdue, which was of no great worry at the time because of the strict policy of radio silence. She could have stopped for any reason, a breakdown, fishing, swimming, bit of recreation or whatever. But by the 20th of November, when she was overdue, she was radioed to report her position and her expected ETA in Fremantle, her expected time of arrival. And there was no answer. So that was when a search was started from her usual route. Now, she'd done this many times before, and I'm sure on the chart that she used, there was probably a furrow in the paper with all the crossings out that would have gone on as she went up and down that track. It should be a movie. I'm not guilty with this soundtrack, I can add. This is the searching aircraft, and the only thing they found was a number of lifeboats with German naval people in them. And this is one of the I've just had a senior's moment here, but I'm trying to remember the name of the ship. Sorry? The Centaur. The Centaur. This was a film that was taken by a chap and his family who had been evacuated from Singapore, which is why Centaur was there. And she was the one who was sent after the aircraft and picked up these lifeboats in the water, or sighted them. Centaur was sent to pick them up. And she hoisted one of them aboard, although she didn't bring any of the Germans aboard. The captain of Centaur was a little bit nervous. He didn't particularly want an enemy, although there was only a few of them, on board his ship. So he actually, as you can see there, he's got them all tied together, but they're not the German lifeboats, they're his lifeboats. Because he found that by towing the German lifeboats, they were of such a design that they kept swamping. And so he put his own in the water, and they told him, you get in those and then I'll tow you into Geraldton. All of that work came to naught because by the time he got into Carnarvon, I should say, he was, about another 300 German survivors had been found and brought in to Carnarvon, and as he was the largest ship, he was told to take all 300 of them on board and take the 3 men. But basically, that was all that was found in the Australian Air Force searching for an Australian warship. There was a bunch of German Navy people in German bays. They told of a big battle with an Australian warship on the 19th of November. Over 300 of them were picked up. They were all interrogated and then interned as prisoners of war. But no sign of Sydney or any of her crew was found at that time. Now, since then, a body which was washed ashore some 3 months later on Christmas Island has been confirmed as a member of HMAS Sydney Ship's Company. Regrettably, his identity actually remains unknown to this day. So what actually happened on the 19th of November 1941? I'll just quickly take you through. This is a visualisation which was done by the Defence Science and Technology Organisation. It takes into account the condition of the wreck of Sydney, a thorough examination of that, as to where the holes are, so where she was hit, and in what probable sequence it was, from the records of the interrogation of the German sailors, and from the weather conditions, known weather conditions of that period in November 1941. And they put this all together. So what you've got here is this is Sydney as seen from the German ship, from Cormorant. Sydney is steaming alongside the German ship. All of her main guns are trained on the German ship. And basically, the captain of Sydney, Joseph Burnett, is asking whoever this ship is, who are you, and where are you going, what is your role, etc., etc. Now, the normal ruse of the German raiders, and I hasten to add here that it wasn't a German invention, actually the Brits invented the concept of the disguised merchant raider in the First World War, but would be to act slovenly, as if they weren't a military ship. If they'd made an instantaneous and very disciplined response to any insistence by Sydney to answer their signals, the suspicion would be raised that these are guys who are thorough professionals who know exactly what they're doing and know what the military procedures and requirements are. So they always act, even to the point where they might have even had a chef hanging over the side having a cigarette or something like that, to make it look as if they were innocent. But then Sydney said, righto, show me your secret sign. And of course this stumped the captain of Cormoran, Theodore Dedmus, because he had no idea what that meant. And so he had to do something which he had only ever hoped he would avoid, which was to do battle with a warship. The German High Command had actually instructed all of both warships and their German raiders, the disguised merchantmen, that they were to avoid conflict, avoid battles with warships, basically because the German Navy was inferior in numbers, and they wanted to protect their assets so that they could use them in preying on commercial ships and whatever. So, but nonetheless, Dedmus had practiced and worked out what he would need to do if he ever had to do battle with a warship. And so he dropped his disguise with devastating results. And his answer then to Sydney's demand for the secret signal was this: 3 hits instantaneously in the bridge area. Sydney answered with all 4 turrets. These are all hits from Cormoran. That's the bridge, that's B turret out of action. A turret out of action. Bridge direct hits about 4 times. This is, what you're seeing here is the actual timing. Sydney now is in a situation, we're less than probably a minute into the action, where all of her centralised gunnery system is disabled and there's no one alive on the bridge in the command structure. The 2 after turrets, X and Y, continue to fire. Cormoran then fired a torpedo, 2 torpedoes, one of which hit the ship just after the bow, almost under A turret. Now, not many, lots of ships were lost due to torpedo action in the war, and there were lots of ships lost due to gunnery action. But very few had to grapple with the problem of a torpedo hit in the middle of a gunfight. Sydney started to turn to port. Some people later said that maybe she was trying to ram. I would say probably at this stage she was just out of control and just her steering system was unable to cope. So she passed astern of Cormoran, and Cormoran continued to fire. In all, Cormoran fired 400 5.9-inch high-explosive shells at Sydney, 83 of which hit. We know that because there's 83 holes in Sydney, about 40 or so either side. Because the Germans were given the opportunity to go both sides because of that turn from Sydney, of Sydney. In all, the action lasted 40 minutes. At this stage, one of the after turrets, X turret, which were having to be fired and aimed and elevated and trained manually by pumping the thing around, this huge turret, managed to disable Cormoran by setting fire to it. I'll continue that in a minute. This is later on that night, and this is what the naval architects in the Defence Science and Technology Organisation think would have been the situation. The swell was up later that night by about 10 o'clock. Sydney was rolling between 15 and 45 degrees, never upright. Still burned fiercely amidships. And she continued to roll until all of those holes kept taking more water on until she just lost buoyancy and slipped beneath the waves. Now have a look at this. This is a simulation of all of the port side hits if they had happened at once, rather than individual, just to show you the scale of the, or the ferocity of the firepower that's usually subjected to. And so, at the end of the action, that was the evening of the 19th and into the 20th, I put that up there just to describe the situation, was that it wasn't until 4 days later than that Sydney was there was even any worry enough to start a search. So, if there were any survivors from the action, it was too late before they even started looking. And keep in mind that when they started looking, they were looking for a ship which was overdue, not for people in the water. And so the search went on, December the 12th, 1941. That is the actual headline in the West Australian of that day, in the banner in Hay Street and St George's Terrace. Then over the years, conflicting stories, then various attempts at identifying where to go, what might have happened, until basically November 2001, when as a result of a Joint Committee of Parliament investigation over a couple of years between about 1999 and 2000, one of the recommendations was that the Navy run a seminar to bring all of the people who think they have an idea of where Sydney might be together to see if there was any confidence that the search area could be determined and whether or not it would cost a nation's GDP to do it or whether indeed it was possible. One of the regrettable things about that seminar, because over the years there have been so many people spending so much time trying to work out what happened, why it happened, who did what, who was obeying international rules and who wasn't and whatever, whereas there was a core of people who said, we don't care about all that, we want to know where. We don't want to know why or who or when or etc, we want to know where. But unfortunately that seminar failed because none of these people who really wanted to work out whether or not the Germans had committed atrocities, war crimes, etc, would get out of their trenches. And so in the end it was inconclusive, and that saw the birth of the Finding Sydney formation under its trustee, the proprietary company HMAS Sydney Search. Then 3 people, swelled to 5, including myself, within a year or so, established itself on the basis that we believed it could be done, that we could identify where to go, and that it was affordable. The offshore industry over the years had made huge steps in the technologies to find resources and to mine those resources from the ocean floor. There was no reason at all to suspect that those sorts of resources couldn't be put to play in the search for Sydney. And indeed, earlier on, as you probably might recall, the Americans via the Glomar Explorer had done exactly that with a couple of Russian submarines and found the Titanic. Of course, as we now know, say of course, and may not know, was that whole Titanic search was actually the cover story for the discovery of those, or trying to recover those 2 Russian nuclear submarines. And that's how they got the money to do it. So the foundation was formed with 2 very simple objectives: to find Sydney and then to permanently commemorate the men involved by establishing an internet-based virtual memorial. In 2008, that was the foundation. Glenys MacDonald, Keith Rowe, Don Pridmore, yours truly, and our chairman, Ted Grove. What did we inherit? That's my terminology, stolen from Douglas Adams and modified. The Australian Institute was slowly and painfully working out the surprisingly obvious. The surprisingly obvious was that the Germans were not telling porkies. Why would they? As they are picked up out of the water, they know that there's 300 of their buddies somewhere around. Why would they not say where to go and look for them? So we were convinced the Germans were telling the truth, and that some 60 odd years, keeping in mind of course the technology did exist for many of those 60 odd years, of obfuscation about all of the whys and the whats and the who's rather than the wheres. What was the German account? Well, as I said before, the Germans had planned and were well drilled in how to engage a warship if it was underwater. They were in a situation where they were unable to comply with the instructions from Sydney, and they used the element of the close range, the element of surprise, to even out the fighting capabilities of the ships. Sydney's command and control was quickly disabled, and she had the overwhelming battle problem of the simultaneous gunfire and torpedo heads. She had disabled Cormoran from X-turret, and Cormoran, according to the people who were picked up out of the water, was scuttled in the vicinity of that position there. As they took to the boats, some hours after the action, the Germans, the last they saw of Sydney was a glow that suddenly went out. Now that to us meant that that was the moment of sinking. Now if they're seeing that from a lifeboat, the horizon isn't that far away. So we believed that there was a datum. The seminar said there was no datum research. We reckoned there was a datum, and that datum was named Cormoran. Where Cormoran lay, we knew then Sydney would be within 10 to 20 miles in some direction or other. Meanwhile, overseas, there was another fellow by the name of David Mans who had found HMAS Hood in the Sea of Denmark and did a television documentary on the Hood and Bismarck. He had to re-find the Bismarck because Ballard, who found it first, wouldn't tell him where it was, so he had to find it again. Mind you, he had a much smaller search area. And he had come up with a conclusion. We had come up with a conclusion as well. We had early work by Professor Kim Kersner and a mathematician, Dr. John Dunn from the University of WA. Did a lot of research based on the German accounts and oceanographic and weather research using experts in the Australian Maritime Safety Authority, using the algorithms they use for search and rescue and weather and drift analyses, etc., etc. Now, Mans had come up with an area which was overlapped the area that and I'll show you them in a minute, that the foundation had come up with. And this was important because this was the first time that we were able to take to the Chief of Navy, who was then Vice Admiral Ritchie, take to him the results of research by two competent organisations using research which could be confirmed, which could be verified, back to source documentation. All of the methodology could be checked and rechecked. It was all competently done. It was the first time we had a situation where there was some congruence of research. And Admiral Ritchie then said, right, I'm convinced. He then convinced the Minister for Defence, who said, I'm convinced, get on and do it. No money, just well done, you know, you've done good research, get on. So we got on. Just quickly, these are the search areas. Now that's the 26th parallel there. Over here is Shark Bay, Denham, Steep Point. The Finding Sydney Foundation came up with this box here for Cormoran. We reckon Cormoran was somewhere in there. And if Cormoran was somewhere in there, Sydney was somewhere in that sector. David Mearns had come up with a solution, two solutions. One is that Cormoran could lie in that circle, or it could lie in that circle, because he didn't know whether or not the position that the captain of Cormoran and the navigator of Cormoran had given to their interrogators was the noon position, which all ships always recorded, and it was always remembered, or whether it was the battle position. So they were 4 hours apart. So he said, I couldn't rely on that position that they gave being the battle position. So he said it's either there or there. If Cormoran was either of those, then Sydney would be either in that or that. That was what convinced Admiral Ritchie that we knew what we were doing. He made a condition then, sort of a condition. He said that really, if you're going to get government interested, dare I say, he says, this Mearns chap, he might be an American living in England, and therefore, you know, we recognise it is an Australian story that we're talking about here. But if you want to turn the pollies, show them you've got some substance. This guy's done it 30 times before. He's found warships, he's found merchant ships from the Second World War era. He's worked for insurance companies and found insurance for 3 miles deep and all that sort of stuff. He knows his stuff. Getting him on board, some form of cooperative venture, I reckon then you'll get the eyes of government saying, get on with it, and that's what happened. Just out of interest, that was the area that we thought from the Finding Sydney Foundation research, Kersner and Dunn, and all their oceanographers, where Cormoran might be. Where did we find it? It was there. So that was devised in 2004. So we had the money in 2004, before we even knew that David Mearns existed, and we got out there with the thing. But we didn't. There was more fun and frustration to be had yet. And just to show you, that's the search box for Cormoran as it turned out in the Sydney, and put it in that geographical context. Funding, we knew that we weren't going to get what we needed from just the mums and dads around the country, but we got quite a lot. You know, we had pensioners giving us $1,000, you know, people that had relatives, or in fact some 2 widows who'd never remarried, who gave quite considerable sums of money. From the private sector, a single donation of $200,000. West Australians gave us, the government gave us $500,000. Importantly, they gave us $100,000 up front. So we've actually set up an office and start doing stuff that cost money. Up until that time, we'd all be getting in the ways of our wives in their kitchens, underfoot, sort of having meetings in lounge rooms, and it just wasn't right. And nor was it conducive to good relationships. So we got ourselves an office. The New South Wales government, in the which government was that? I can't remember, but as you're well aware, they recently went bust, and you can understand why. Mind you, this was in 2005. We just got a phone call, or I got a phone call, saying, "What's your BSB and account number?" Pardon? Says, "Oh, we've got $250,000 here. We're going to give you. Just want your BSB and account number." I said, "All right." And I went online, and about 20 minutes later, and there it was. And I rang him back and I said, "Don't you want, a request or a letter?" No. Anyway, eventually we got an initial grant of 1.3 from the federal government. We convinced them that that wasn't enough, and so they gave us, strangely enough, in an election year, another 2.9 million, added up to that, and then we were cooking with gas. 29th of February 2008, we sailed from Jordan in the search vessel Geosounder. The objective, to do a 30-day side-scan sonar search in order to find Sydney. We didn't think we were going to have enough time or money to do any visual stuff. We thought we'd need all of that, those 30 days, to actually cover that search area and find the ship by sonar. And this is all the equipment within the control room of the search vessel. We sailed into that. Ophelia and Pancho, I think that was the names of them. Just a little bit about the side scan sonar. It's just basically like taking an audio version of a searchlight, a machine that would shine a light out either side, except that it was a sound wave, sound beam. And the reflections of that sound would then be recorded by the onboard systems and to identify any objects and their nature on the sea floor. Now, keep in mind that this is 3,000 metres. That sled was towed at about 500 metres above the sea floor, shining 2.5 kilometres either side with the sound waves. So that there, the length of tow was actually 10 kilometres. So that is actually 10 kilometres behind the search vessel. And that required very sophisticated and very competent navigation on behalf of the people that did that, because they had to go up the lawn, do a big turn and bring that machine back down the other stripe of the lawn. Exactly. So you didn't waste any time, didn't recover old ground and whatever. So that was very good, very competent people. That is the side scan sonar. It doesn't look much, but that's it. Towed along behind. And a bit more of the insides. And then on the 12th of, the 12th of March 2008, late in the afternoon, a big shape emerged on the traces. It doesn't come up like that all at once. This is actually painted by the system. Each dot is 3 seconds. So that takes quite a while to paint that picture. Now, the trigonometry involved, and the computer did all that, did some measurements, and found that this dimension here was the same dimension as the beam of Cormorant. So it's fairly clear that it was Cormorant. Also, David Manns would know, because of his experience, that these shadows, these acoustic shadows that are cast, he says, are 99% caused by man-made rather than geological objects on the seafloor. Usually, particularly a seafloor like that up there, a geological, a pile of rocks or whatever, doesn't cast these very distinct hard shadows. So he was convinced that that was Cormorant.
What are those black things like poles sticking up? Would they be guns or something from the ships?
These?
Yeah.
No, they're just other objects on the seafloor. Probably just bits of debris, whatever. As I'll show you later, is it on this? No, I don't think it is. The actual debris field is over about 2 kilometres of the seafloor. And Alston picked it up as well. He was right on the money there, because there's still people arguing, the conspiracy theorists are still telling us that we haven't found Sydney, it was all a put-up job. And actually, we've got a big shed out at the Maylands aerodrome where we did all this and produced a movie and all that sort of stuff. And then 4 days later, same thing, another shape, this time very characteristic of a warship without a bow. And again, a very distinct shadow. And that was something which David Manns, because of his experience, was able to say, that is Sydney. And that's what we thought we'd be doing on the 30th day of the search. But in fact, notwithstanding the fact we had a lot of weather and technical problems, we found Cormorant in just 60 hours of actual searching, operational time, even though it was into the end of the second week because of all the weather and technical problems we had. And we found Sydney about the same time after we found Cormorant. And so Sydney went, the search vessel went back into Geraldton, landed all the sonar gear and embarked the remotely operated vehicle. Now that is the ROV in its little, that's the garage, and that's the machine there with all its little cable runs and whatever. That's lowered to the sea floor, about 2.5 kilometres below, and then the ROV has then swum out and steered around the sea floor and around the wreck. Those of you who might remember those first TV images that came up when we got these first photos of Sydney might have noticed that it was bobbing up and down. A little bit more of a comment on the skill of those guys in that search vessel was that here it was, the world was watching. This was lowered to the sea floor, and this little swine wouldn't come out of his garage. No, can't be bothered. So the captain of this ship said, okay, the world's watching, you have to do something. So he winched it back off the sea floor and then manoeuvred the ship with this dangling 2.5 kilometres below him around the wreck to get those first photos. Remarkable piece of seamanship. I mean, you know, when you think of it in hindsight, if he'd snagged something or collected a big heap of superstructure or something like that, it would have been disastrous. But nonetheless, it worked. Now I'm going to take you through some of the still shots that we took. Just to show you what you're going to see in a photograph of the wreck, some of them I've got these little reconstructed photographs of the part of the ship that you're about to see. So this is the bow up here, the bridge structure, the gun director tower there, the bridge roof, A turret and B turret. That's B turret with 2 direct hits. As you saw in that simulation, within the first few seconds of the, or within the first minute or so of the action. The German survivors said that they saw, and this is them saying this in November 1941, they saw the roof of B turret fly off after it was hit. There it is, the roof of B turret, missing. This is the bridge, the forward screen of the bridge. Up here it's very, unfortunately we haven't got very many good photographs of the area up top there, but basically that's all been squashed in, and the experts believe that what caused that, the squashing in, the bending back of the bridge, was that as the ship sank, the bow broke off because of the damage created by the torpedo, and the bow actually just folded back up over the ship, hit the bridge and bounced off, taking the gun direction system with it as it went, and the masts and the funnels. That's a photograph of Sydney coming back on the 10th of February 41, just to show you a very distinctive feature of this class of ship. That's the gun direction system, the barbette on which it rotates, and that very distinctive, only the modified Leanders had that structure, for those people who don't believe it's Sydney down there. One of the range finders sitting on the seabed, the gun direction tower with the bridge roof just innocently lying next to it. The 4-inch gun deck, Sydney had 4 4-inch guns, and that's one of them there. Now we found that all of the guns, all of the 4-inch guns, were all elevated, which indicates that when Sydney was prosecuting Cormorant, that it's likely that those guns were not manned, that they only had the main turrets. So she was probably not at full action stations, which is what they call defence watch, which may be one of the reasons why she was unable to react against such an onslaught. Sydney had 2 sets of quad torpedo tubes. We found, and they're unreloadable, so once they'd fired 8 torpedoes, that was it. We found 7 torpedoes. There's 2 of them there. There's one just near this set of torpedo tubes. So it is likely that she fired one. The Cormorant said that she fired a torpedo or torpedoes. They didn't know how many, but she may well have fired one, but missed. shell hits on the port side, shell hits on the starboard side. Now keep in mind that the guns that Cormorant had, and I'll show you a bit of Cormorant later, were ex-World War I 5.9-inch guns. She had six of them. Two in the well decks for the disguised hatch covers, and one either side of the bow and one either side of the stern. They were manually aimed, manually trained, manually loaded. For those of you who are used to firing on a rifle range, that is pretty good gunnery. Those are all non-penetrating hits in the vicinity of the engine room, which was where Sydney was armed. Mind you, it would have shaken up the people the other side of it. Would have had their ears ringing, I can assure you. But the German gunnery was very good. Note also that these aren't glancing blows, they're full-on blows. That's indicating to us that they were very low trajectory. In other words, that the guns weren't elevated to get range, so therefore it was short range. Confirming what the Germans said, that Sydney was only about 500 metres away when they opened fire. Again, more gun hits, this time from Cormorant's 2-centimetre machine guns, rapid firing guns. Apart from her big guns, she had one either side of a 30-centimetre armour-piercing gun and three 2-centimetre machine guns, rapid fire, which she just used whilst she was engaging Sydney with her main guns to essentially just hose down the upper deck to make sure that no one could get to those 4-inch guns, and if anyone was fool enough to put up their head, it was going to get shot off. Those guns were very short range, particularly the 2-centimetre. Again, these are the 2-centimetre hits. Straight full on. So not only is it confirmed that Sydney was beaten because there's no glancing blows, but it's further evidence that it was very short range.
Why wouldn't Sydney have turned itself bow on instead of staying side on so that the Germans could kept on firing straight at the ship?
Blew the bridge off.
I mean, just
Watching this.
One of the quandaries of all this is that what the thought process was on the bridge of Sydney is unknowable. All you can keep in mind is that Sydney's successes in 1940, she had the same bridge crew. So what were they thinking? We will never know. It's unknowable. I can't answer the question. The aircraft catapult sitting on the seabed. It's the aircraft. That's the aircraft there after it was shot out of the sky, and the pilot, Flight Lieutenant Tommy Price, got a DFC out of that. He was bounced by three, while he was up spotting during the bombardment of Bardia, by three aircraft, which severely damaged him. A particularly DFC-worthy feat of flying got into a desert airstrip where you can see the aircraft was actually severely damaged on landing. The funny story that goes with it, or the interesting story, is that Sydney was an Australian ship, this is in the Mediterranean, as part of a Royal Navy cruiser squadron, answerable to the Admiralty in London. So to get an Australian a DFC by asking the British chain of command, when this was caused by three British aircraft, not recognising that it was an Allied thing, which is the truth of the matter, the citation from Collins said that it was three Italian aircraft that had bounced the guy, because It wasn't how it happened. What he wanted was that this guy, Tommy Price, would be rewarded for the magnificent feat of flying, that he got this severely damaged aircraft with all of its crew of 3 onto land, and they all survived. That's what he wanted to reward. And so I guess I can almost imagine, he says, "You sure it was Brits? Did any element of that?" "Ah, they could have been Italian." "That's it, they're Italian."
Where was the desert part where the plane landed? Please.
I can't remember. It was in Libya.
Oh.
He actually came to one airfield that was one of his, because every time he took off from Sydney, he had to have in mind what his alternatives were if for any reason he couldn't get back to the ship. He went to one of those alternatives, didn't like the shape of the helmets that he was looking at, and he realised that they were the wrong ones, and obviously that airfield had been overrun, so he then had to hightail it for another one, which was all part of that feat of flying. But the actual name of the airfield, I'm not sure. One of Sydney's boats. Another one with the old kitchen rudder gear. Oops. X-turret. This is the one which was credited with hitting Cormoran and disabling her by setting fire to the engine room. She had 2 hits in the engine room and 2 in the funnel. And Cormoran was a diesel electric ship, and she had a funny sort of oil cooling apparatus that went up through the funnel. So when the funnel was hit, all of that oil poured down into the engine room and caught fire. And the only way they could stop the fire was to shut down the engine room, which is where the majority of the 80 that were killed in Cormoran were killed, because they were shut in there to save the ship, which of course eventually they didn't. So the gun layers ports are open, which indicates that these guys would have opened those because of all of the centralised control system was gone, and so they were actually sighting that gun by peering down the barrels, lining them up and firing themselves. So that was pretty good going. Cormoran, that's Devon's, Captain of Cormoran, Burnett of HMAS Sydney. Just very quickly, Cormoran had one 5.9-inch gun either side of the bow, one either side of the stern. This is Cormoran with her guns. Strangely enough, you can't see them because they're under flats here, which are dropped just by a counterweight system where they just knock out a pin, the flaps just fly up, and the Germans claimed that they could go from that to a firing warship within 12 seconds. It's impossible because the rate of training of those guns, particularly these ones which were trained fore and aft and would therefore would have to be trained out, couldn't achieve that. And the experts say it was probably closer to 18 seconds. So it was quite an element of surprise if they could get firing quickly. She also had 5.9-inch guns in the hatch covers, as well as, I said, the smaller calibre guns. She had a torpedo tube under the waterline and 2 above the waterline on either side of the ship. And this is Cormoran. That's her bow, with a gantry rig here, because basically, and this again was recorded back in 1941, the thing that was focusing the minds of most of the German survivors was that they had no power. They had to get their lifeboats out of the hatches, out of the holds, in the upper part of the hold. Meanwhile, there's 300 mines in the after end of the ship, and there's a fire. So it probably doesn't surprise you that most of them had a preference to be up the front end of the ship. And so most of them went over the bow, and that was the gantry that they rigged for that. That's a shot of one of her guns on one of the forward guns in its compartment. The actual flat mechanism, you can only see the hinges left there now, because obviously it was torn off as the ship sank. But that's one of the guns there.
That's the hatch there.
Sorry?
That was the hatch on top there.
No, that's the side of, that's the deck, and that's the side of the ship. The actual flaps were there, and that's the hinges. Basically what had happened was that they were pinned down here, the pins had knocked out, there's a counterweight, and the hatch would just flip up. And then they just rolled the gun out, which was already loaded, and started firing. That, very briefly, was the upper torpedo tubes, the one which are above the waterline. Their flaps open. They're the ones that were fired by Cormoran that hit Sydney. That's part of Cormoran's deck. She was very, very heavily damaged. In fact, there's only half the ship there. Because what happened as she sank is that all of those 300 mines did, in fact, explode. And so all we can see is the forward part of the ship. It says submerged torpedo tube, one which was below the waterline, which she was afloat. So, what have we come to? The objectives of finding Sydney had been achieved, as had the virtual memorial, which is a light on the internet now. Cormoran was close to where Captain Wood said she would be in 1941. The damage to Cormoran was confirmed, the statement way back in 41 by those German survivors. Sydney was where the Germans said they last saw her. Not that they thought that she had sunk there, that's where they last saw her. Sydney's damage was consistent with individual survivors saying things like they saw the turret, the top of the turret fly off and a few other things. The fact that X turret was still firing, etc. And so you can deduce that from that most of what the German statements had said was probably true. In 2009 we spent a lot of money appointing a QC and 17,000 cast members to actually say that. But who am I to complain to them? And we established, importantly, that such impossible searches can succeed, which we found out just within the next following 12 months, when, because of that, the federal government, Queensland governments, mounted a search, Centaur, and found it. Guess where they found it? Where the navigator said he last saw it. So that was really just another lesson which we reminded them of. Said, well, that's the second time in 2 years where we've overcome 60 years of mucking about. They're going to where the guy who last saw it said he saw it. That's one of the German boats that came ashore off Carnarvon. So we're getting into some of the, I guess, the artefacts of it. And there it is, still there in Carnarvon. A bit worse for wear now.
There's one in Canberra too.
Yes.
I'll tell you.
That's not a very good, I put that in as an afterthought there. It just describes, that's the coast of Western Australia. There's a trail all the way up Western Australia, which is to do with HMAS Sydney. Starts at Peaceful Bay. There's plaques at Rockingham. There's going to be a naval memorial in Fremantle. There is also the West Australian Cricket Association's museum has an HMAS Sydney 2 display in its Lest We Forget room. There's the memorial at Geraldton.
Magnificent.
Yes, isn't it? Yep. There is, now what's that one there? I can't remember. Denham. There's going to be a new memorial at Denham.
Blowholes, isn't it?
Yep. Yeah, that's Steep Point. Yeah. And there's one going up in Denham at the World Heritage Centre. There is the existing Memorial Avenue at Carnarvon, which is now severely degraded because of floods and cyclones. And I'm part of a team that's putting up a new one, hopefully, to replace that. But still having that concept of it being an avenue of 645 long.
Trees in there.
There's quite, yeah, but half of them were blown down. In fact, they're quite embarrassed to say that, you know. Quagga Point. So there is a trail. In fact, it also actually starts in Sydney Harbour, because there is the Sydney mast there on Bradley's Head. There is a memorial in Melbourne. So Sydney is alive in the conscience of Australia, just surprisingly. In fact, I'm no longer surprised the number of times I just trip over people that have some connection with Sydney. Whoops. Questions?
Yeah. You may not be aware that the lifeboat that's in Canberra, it was shipped across on the raft. And of course, with so heavy troop movements across east-west at Meriden, they shunted that off. There was a 2-hour wait for another train to get the line through. And in that meantime, that tarped over, the word of mouth got around the town, and the Red Cross took money off people to have a look at that, pull the tarp back, and they cleared £27, or 12 and sixpence or something like that in there. But that's in 1942, early part of it. I've got that written down from the Meriden Mercury, and that still can be got at the Gabby Library. Just look it up, but I can give you that date and that. I've got it in notes at home. And another thing I was going to lost it. But I was saying that up there past the blowholes is that quite a nice memorial.
Yeah.
Quite
point. Yeah.
If the Cormorants managed to get lifeboats away, and quite a lot of men, why is it the Sydney thing managed to get people away?
Well, Worship doesn't have lifeboats.
No, they have floats, don't they?
Well, they have Carly lifeboats, and who knows? Two of them were found.
Yeah.
One with no one on it, and one with the body on it. Now, the body, just to answer your question, all of Sydney's boats, other than the sea boats that were on davits either side of the bridge, which are usually when the ship is at sea, they're ready to lower. They're just for things like man overboard, whatever type of operations. The other boats have to be craned out of their cradles and taken, so if there's no power, they can't be moved. Sydney had 9 boats and we found 7. They're all severely damaged. As I said, we found 2 Carly life rafts, but one of them is in the War Memorial in Canberra, which is the one that came ashore at Christmas Island. And if you think about that, it's a bit more than I know. But they know that the remains of that body had a hole in his head, and they found the piece of shrapnel. So when he was alive, he must have had a bit of a headache. So how did he get on the life raft? He wouldn't have been on it when the ship sank. So he must have been in the water. In that condition, do you think he would have got on himself, or someone helped him on? So if someone helped him on, what happened with that? He obviously didn't survive. Sydney was overwhelmed, and I would imagine, as I said in that little clip there, just there were in all our helplessness, and not a ship in sight. And I would imagine that there would have been people in the water. They would have been wounded. They would have been suffering from smoke inhalation, and even in those waters, it's just 3 to 4 days, and just the lowering in body temperatures, even in those waters, they just die. And in deep water, the bodies don't float up again because they're compressed as the gases generate. The sea pressure holds them in. And interestingly, Cormoran lost some 30 of her men were wounded, and they were put in the first boat that was lowered. And as it pulled away from the ship, it capsized and all of those wounded drowned. So unable to go out. Those bodies never found. So that, and no one in any of the Cormorant lifeboats, none of the Germans, ever saw a body in the water. So, very strange. I've overrun time, Terry, I know.
Oh,
I told you I would.
That's okay. That's fine. I'm just going to ask if there are any more questions. And Colin's still got something.
Well, the thing was, that was the time that I had a terrific loss in the British with the German U-boats, and they were claiming that they could capture whatever shipping they could to help the British cause. And this may have been one of the reasons why he got in closer to the Cormorant and got blasted. The Australian warship was looking for a prize to take as to capture a foreign boat.
Could have done.
Yeah, it's just theory. That was.
Yeah, we just
I've heard it before.
Yeah, it could have done. I think the fact is that the captain of Sydney Burnett knew there were raiders in the Indian Ocean. They knew what their capabilities were. Cormorant, even though no one knew it was her, they knew that 11 ships had gone missing. In fact, Cormorant had sunk 11 ships. So, pyrrhic as it may be, it was some victory for Sydney, was that Cormorant was taken off the surface of the ocean, having already sunk 11 ships. And so, yeah, who knows? But as I was saying before, it's unknowable because no one survived the action.
I was only about 9, or 8 or 9, and I remember my father blowing up when he heard the news on the ABC radio. We were on the phone, and his younger sister was a nurse, and of course the Centaur was sunk, and he blew up and he blamed the government straight away for that, and that's real stuck in their head. You see, what it was, because of this loss of shipping, the Centaur was in Sydney, and they, wharfies refused to load any ammunition or arms to go to New Guinea. So here they had this Japanese spy apparently locating what was happening on there, and the government brought the troops in to load the Centaur of the arms to go home. And of course it got off the coast there and got sunk by torpedoes. And
Well, Centaur
was
would,
thought his
I've
sister
got
was
to
in.
correct you there. Centaur wouldn't have been loaded with arms. Centaur was a hospital ship.
Yeah, well that was against the Geneva
Yeah.
Convention, but apparently that's what did happen. And that's what the father blew up over.
Yeah.
So I can just recall that.
Folks, are there any more questions of Bob? Yeah, there's one here, Bob.
Is it really very surprising that nobody survived from the city?
Not really. Given the circumstances. She was certainly overwhelmed by the surprise of the action. She probably would have had merely survived the action, but didn't survive the fall of sea. Uncommon people in the water.
People say, oh, I can't believe nobody survived.
Well, I'm sure they did. It's just they didn't survive
For long.
for long. It's the fortunes of war. When Bismarck was sunk, the Brits sailed away and left 800 in the water. Only because, as much as they would have liked to pick them up out of the water, German submarines and things, so they weren't going to hang around. It's just the way it was.
Folks, if there's no further questions, I'd like you to put your hands together and thank Bob.